And it's with my amazing new tech, I am measuring. I have the data for myself, so I'll measure somebody running barefoot if their feet are used to running in a minimal shoe. So, for instance, a footballer will be used to running around the pitch in a completely flat shoe, no support, just studs underneath.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to then measure that same footballer with a pair of trainers on and see the force change. So we know the studies have gone back decades now where it was established that when there is a cushion underneath your foot, you will land firmer, you will land harder. It's the same body weight. So on my force plate treadmill, people will run and they will have a force going into the force plate that I can measure with 8,000 sensors.
Wow.
And they will run at the same speed with their shoes on, and there will be more force. And I find that so interesting. It's being revealed in front of me. I am reading and seeing for myself the research that goes back actually a really long way.
Well, Nike found out about that in the 80s, didn't they? So that's one of the famous quotes from the Born to Run book.
FC2O. From chaos to order. From chaos to order. Here we go. From chaos to order. From chaos to order. FC2O.
Helen has been a colleague and friend of mine since 2007 when we first met due to our shared interest in human movement and function. As you'll hear, aside from Helen's explorations into human biomechanics and gait, she is someone who practices what she preaches and holds the accolade of being the world's first barefoot female Ironman, even if that seems something of a misnomer. Helen has run marathons, Ironmen, ultras, and all in barefoot or minimalist footwear, as well as coaching thousands of people, both directly and through her fantastic barefoot running albums, Barefoot Goddess and Barefoot Apollo, in association with pop star and fellow barefoot runner Kirsty Hawkshaw. Helen and I have presented at various conferences and events together, and on one long train journey back from Edinburgh, I talked Helen into digging deeper into the Paleo approach, something she and her husband embraced and still very much follow to this day, combining it with her penchant for endurance events. So sit back and enjoy this chat with Helen Hall, one of life's true enthusiasts and someone who walks the talk to the nth degree. Enjoy the show. Here we go.
Welcome to another edition of FC2O with me, Matt Wallden, and my guest, Helen Hall.
Thank you, Matt. I'm very pleased to be here.
Excellent. Fantastic. Now, obviously we met, I'm trying to remember when we met. Was it around 2007, 2008, something like that?
It was at Olympia Back Show, 2007.
Yes.
Where I was in my Fieldmax toe socks.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across shoes where I could put my toes without taking my socks off straight into them. And I just thought this was the best thing ever.
I remember, I do remember that. And in fact, that was the very first show I think we went to as distributors of the Vibram Five Fingers. And so they were, I remember the reactions at the show, obviously, where people were quite bemused by them and shocked by them. But I think you were one of the few people that saw the light straight away. You were like, this is something that is going to work. And
this works with my socks. I even already had my feet prepared because I think it was Olympic Black. I'm pretty sure that was in the wintry time. So having the toe socks already on before my feet went in, before I even knew such a thing existed.
Yes.
It was very cool.
Yeah.
I was ready for you.
Excellent. So if we take a little step back before that, because obviously you at the time you were running 10 Point, which was essentially a specialist running store and triathlon store, really, wasn't it?
Yes, back then it was triathlon. Yeah, we did everything swim, bike, run. Of course, it started run, and then we added bike, and then because triathlon has that wet thing, we had to do the wet thing. Although I still don't do well with the wet thing. But yeah, back in the day when it was a shop, and people came shopping, into shops. No longer the way now.
Yes, exactly. Now, what had led you into that in the first instance? Because I know a little bit about your background. I know that you started in the military and became, when you left the military, I understand that you went into manual lymphatic drainage as a part of what you did. But can you just walk us through that sort of that phase of your career?
So when I was an air traffic control supervisor when I was in the Air Force, and felt obliged to look after the squadron football team, because ever since I can remember, I looked after people with rose petal poultices, whatever bandaging might be available. Yeah. And then when I left the Air Force, I wanted to be a physiotherapist. But I couldn't afford to go back to university for 3 years. So I did a year at college, remedial massage. And when I came back from Africa, so then there was a little hiatus when I lived in Africa for nearly 5 years, and my youngest son was born there. When I came back, having worked in a physiotherapist clinic, doing all sorts of things that I really had no qualifications to do, but I did it with the physiotherapist looking over my shoulder, and I had a good pair of hands, so she allowed me to help her. I came back, and of course I was not qualified to do what I had been doing in Africa. And there was such a thing when I came back called a sports therapist, which I'd never even heard of. Right. And it seemed to me that sports therapists were doing what I was doing before I left for Africa as a remedial master. We're going back, this was late 80s. Right. I don't know how many years that is. That's like 30 years, isn't it? Yeah. And then my best friend from Africa got breast cancer. And it was the first time that I could recall not having any skills to help her. And then back in those days, before Google, I looked up Yellow Pages because she'd heard of something called manual lymph drainage. And I found somewhere on the South Coast through Yellow Pages, which said that they did a form of manual lymph drainage. So I called them and had a natter, as you did in those days. Mm-hmm. And she said, "Oh, we don't do that tricky one. We don't do that difficult one." And I said, "What do you mean, the difficult one?" And she said, "Well, there's, the VODA one is a bit tricky, so we don't do that one." So of course, I closed the conversation and then went off in search of VODA. Yes. And your lymph drainage, thinking, I think I want that one. Yeah. And then set off to get qualified in VODA manual lymph drainage. I had to go to Austria to get fully qualified. Right. And I still felt it wasn't quite fulsome enough. I didn't feel confident that anybody who walked in through the clinic door I could help. So then I managed to get on the Leduc medical lymph drainage course, and I added that to my arsenal, and then I felt confident. And then MBTs came into my life. Yes, yeah. This is the long-winded version of how we got to the shop. Yeah. So MBTs there was an article in the Sunday Times, and it talked about all the things that I worked with, and with lymphedema, and that I had, which was sciatica. And I thought, goodness me. So I spoke to the CEO of Masai Barefoot Technology in Liverpool Street at the time, and went to see him, and then started selling MBTs from my clinic and out of the boot of my car. I would go and visit people and fit them and show them how to move in a better way using these crazy shoes. And then it sort of had a life of its own. And then before I knew it, I needed to have a shop. Yes. And I opened the first MBT shop in the UK, and the CEO from Liverpool Street came and cut the ribbon. Oh, wow. So my barefoot journey started with the most ridiculous clod up in great shoes that you could imagine. Yeah. Thick soles and you were 2 inches off the floor. But it had barefoot in the name. So yes. And when was that? What sort of year would that have been? That was 2000 and 2004.
Right.
I opened the shop 2004. And then, so 3 years later, when I was no longer the only person in the whole wide world, or at least in the UK, selling MBTs, we then had Newtons in the shop, which were magical to run in after the weight of the MBTs.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I met you.
Yeah. Right. So you're a real what's the word? An early adopter.
I think I can safely say of the many things I am, one of them is definitely an early adopter.
Yes, excellent. Okay, fantastic. So now, when did you? Because you obviously were running prior to meeting me. What sort of? I know you were the first person to run an Ironman, or first woman to run an Ironman in barefoot shoes or minimalist shoes. That's one claim to fame. But what had you done prior to that? Had you run several marathons or other Ironmans in normal running shoes, so to speak?
No, that was my first Ironman, and they were my only trainers. So it was a complete accident. And Robin, who worked with me in the shop, he beat me across the line by several hours. So, and he was running in 5 fingers, Robin Davies, and so he was the first in the whole wide world. And I was the second and the first girl. And it was in that same event. So Ironman Austria 2009 was the first time anybody apparently crossed the line. And then Stephen Lord was I thought Stephen Lord was the first, but it turns out his event was after mine. He told me.
Yes.
So that's my icebreaker conversation stopper sometimes, claim to fame.
Yes.
So prior to that, I've run as long as I can remember. It was my freedom down the back lane, and literally it was called the back lane. It's still called the back lane in the village of Lower Quinton, which is where I went to secondary school, where I grew, where I was living when I went to secondary school, and I was allowed to run the 3 miles there and back down the back lane.
Right.
And I was the solo running around the muddy school playing fields on my own every lunchtime.
Okay.
That's what I love doing.
Yeah.
And I wasn't very good at ball sports, even though I tried really hard. I was always reserve. I was enthusiastic, but not very good hand-eye coordination. But I ran a lot. I could run up and down the wing very willingly.
Yes.
And then I trained for my first marathon, which was the inaugural Stratford-upon-Avon marathon. That would have been in 82, just before my 18th birthday. So you can do the maths. I'm quite old. And I arrived, and they said, "Oh no, I ran in my gym knickers," because that's all I had. My school gym knickers and a t-shirt, and some trainers that I bought off the market. And they said, "Oh, you're too young to run the marathon." What? You had to be 18, and I was going to be 18 in 2 weeks.
Right.
And they wouldn't let me. So I ran a half.
Right.
Okay. So I ran a
half. Okay.
And then after that, it was straight into the Air Force, where it was just great big DMS boots and pine poles on your shoulder and kit bags and a lot of trudging. And so running then became something else. So distance running stopped then. You ran the 5 miles that you had to run with the pine pole on your shoulder, as you do. And on camps and things, but it was sort of within the officer training that you had to do. So then running for pleasure took a little bit of a backseat until I was out of the Air Force, more or less.
Sure. Okay. And so when did the interest in triathlon come along? Was that as a result of setting up the shop, or was it prior to setting up the shop?
No, after setting up the shop. So I was running, and everything was geared around running, gait, movement on 2 feet. And then my now husband, Brian, he just, a couple of triathletes came in and they got chatting with Brian, and then before I knew it, we were selling bikes and building bikes, and then in time we became bike fitting instructors.
Right.
Bike fitting. So it just rolled. There was this wonderful meandering path that just rolled out in front of me, and I just went with the flow. I took a place that was for somebody else to go to America, to the bike fitting institute run by Dan Enfield, the godfather of triathlon bicycles, and became the first female road and tri bike fitter, and then the first female road and tri bike fitting instructor in Europe.
So wow.
There were a lot of firsts, but they were all accidents.
Right. Excellent. Now you mentioned both, I think you said Voda and Meduk, is that right? In terms of the training? Yeah. And you and I have had the discussion at some point about trigger points and how to treat them. And I remember your technique. Was that from one of those instructors, or was that a different person that you learned from about trigger points? Yeah,
no, that was, we learned about trigger points back in college when I did the remedial massage. And then with CPD courses since, I came across trigger points. And then there was it became quite I wouldn't say fad, but trigger points suddenly became a bit of a thing. There was a workbook manual that everybody knew about. I've still got it on my bookshelf there. And I still...
Travell and Simons, is that the one?
Yeah. Well, no, so those were the two great big texts.
Yes.
But then there was another, like a Précis version, a blue workbook that was based on Travell and Simons' work. That it just made, it was an easy, quick reference. And when that was published, then everybody was doing trigger, or so it seemed at the time. So it seemed. So that was just something that I knew of and picked up and used more and honed, and still use it even now, although not so much. Yes.
So I remember the discussion we had was that it actually came off the back of, I was training for the London Marathon. So this was 2012, probably 2013. It must have been 2013 actually, because I remember I was a few weeks out from the marathon and my Achilles was starting to give me some trouble. And you said to me, oh, Matt, you just need to screen your calf for trigger points. And I was thinking, I don't have any pain or discomfort in my calf. And so I started doing what I thought I would do normally clinically, and which is to essentially find the tender point and then to do an ischemic compression or an inhibition, which from reading Leon Chato's book, which he did, I'm just trying to think which one it was. I think it was his neuromuscular techniques book. He had a little section in there where he talked about the different approaches to treating trigger points, from strain counter strain to ischemic compression to electroacupuncture, dry needling, ice and stretch, all of those different modalities. And from what he could make out, he concluded that the ischemic compression was possibly the simplest approach, and from the research that had been done into it, seemed equally as effective as the other techniques. So he kind of recommended, just use ischemic compression. But you had a different technique, and this was just milking the trigger point and going, it was cross fiber, isn't it? It was cross fiber as opposed to, but very, very gently. Yeah. And sure enough, my Achilles pain disappeared within about 2 weeks of starting this little regimen. So, and it's something that I know you've used on yourself and obviously with clients across not just marathons, but ultra marathons as well. So can you elaborate on that at all? Or have I kind of covered everything that you would explain?
Well, you have, but it's really interesting because as you were chatting, I realized that every single hands-on modality I use is all about bringing blood through the area. Every single one. And I've got quite a few now. So whether you're draining lymph, whether you're milking a trigger point, whether you're creating a flow through a scar, whether it be a tissue scar on the surface, a tissue scar underneath, or a bone scar from a fracture, the common denominator is always flow. It's always irrigation.
Yes, and that's a very osteopathic concept. The you know, one of the sort of premises of osteopathy is about, it's called the rule of the artery, and the idea that you keep flow of fluid dynamics optimized.
Yeah, and it's also the rule from going back to the very beginnings of working with MLD, with posture, with the MBTs being so useful in the treatment of the lymphedema patients, because of the irrigation. You unkink a body, so you stand it upright without forward leans, without kinks, massive kinks in the inguinal canal, in the groin, behind the knees. So you unflex a body, and then all of the tubes, if you think about the whole of the main artery, vein, air pipes, digestive pipes, the initial ones, they're all, you can picture a schematic as like a plumbing system. And if you can just stack everything on top of each other, everything seems to work better. So with the trigger points, the milking, the cross fiber, just imagining that you're taking inflammatory soup, which is creating pressure that the body is then giving you as feedback as pain. You're just milking that away and allowing fresh nourishment to arrive. It doesn't seem to matter whether you use that milking technique, whether you pulse, whether you stack somebody vertically, whether you stroke the lymph up. All of them work. Because it seems to me that bodies that are uncomfortable are asking to be made more comfortable, not by pummeling, but by enabling fluids to arrive to all areas and depart all areas. It's not good enough. The artery is king, absolutely. It's not good enough just to get the fluids there. We have to enable the fluids to depart, the used blood, and of course the metabolic waste fluid taken away by the lymph system. So it's really, I'd never actually thought of it. All of those is all boiled down to exactly the same thing. Yeah,
it's amazing, isn't it? And one of the things also I remember you talking about is, and I think you were the first person I heard say this, is that the soleus muscle is often termed the second heart. Is that right? Is that?
Yes, but that wasn't me who said it originally. I might have been the first person who said it to you, but I read that in a coloring book, and when I was learning muscle origins and insertions, coloring them in, and it was a book for dancers.
Okay.
And it was the dancers who considered the soleus, well, in that book it was saying the dancers consider the soleus to be the second heart.
Yeah.
I just thought, wow, that's really very cool, because it's so big and it's attached to the great big Achilles tendon, without which we can't run. We can walk without one if your feet are strong enough, but we can't run.
Yeah.
Of the Achilles tendon, because without it I can't run. I'm stroking my Achilles tendon now. I'm loving it.
Excellent. And of course this leads into the whole discussion around barefoot running, because one of the key differences between barefoot running and running shod is that people will tend to favor more of a forefoot strike when they are barefoot or in a very minimalist shoe. And so, of course, there are some people that will do that in a fully cushioned standard running shoe as well, but they tend to be the minority. The figures that I've seen suggest that there's certainly less than 20%, perhaps even less than 10% of people will forefoot strike in a standard running shoe. But those figures pretty much invert when you put them into either a minimalist shoe or into fully barefoot. And so that obviously links back into this idea that you're forefoot striking, the gastroc and soleus in particular are now having to work that a little bit harder, and both concentrically and eccentrically, and therefore you're getting that return of fluids optimized. It would seem. Is that part of the kind of conclusion that you arrived at?
Well, yes. Oh, that ancient and ongoing discussion about midfoot and rear foot first contact. So
it's ancient, but I mean, that's ancient to you and me because we've been in it. But I think, there's still, when you look at most biomechanics books, they still just talk about the gait cycle as being a heel strike, midfoot, toe off, swing phase. And there's not so much yet in the textbooks. I mean, certainly there are in papers, but there's not so much in the textbooks about even the idea you can forefoot or midfoot strike.
So all of the textbooks I've seen, they discuss the walking gait cycle, which, of course, apart from toe walkers, does seem to seems to make a lot of sense that we start at the back of this enormous, great big bone that it seems to be superbly shaped for the job of then rolling through to reach the toes. But landing on that enormous, great big bone with both feet up in the sky.
Yes, and you're referring to the calcaneus here, right?
Yeah, the calcaneus.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't make myself do it. I try to make myself do it. I can't. And every time I'm with somebody, we investigate. So I want their bodies to decide, where do you want to land? Jump up and down. Jump up and down the spot with shoes on. Jump up and down on the spot with shoes on. Where are you wanting to land? And if they're jumping up and down the spot, I don't know how many, it's obviously hundreds, it could be thousands, it probably is thousands of people that I have ended up talking to about this over the years. Not a single one yet. I've seen with my own eyes minimalist runners who land on their rear foot, their heels, their calcaneus, but not many. And when I'm with somebody, we just jump up and down the spot. Nobody has ever. They all land somewhere in front of the heel. And it seems to me an instinctive reaction to wanting to spread the load through the raise of the feet leading to the toes, which have these amazingly strong interosseous muscles that enable that spread and control that spread. So we have a lovely base of support that grows as our body weight lands through them. And because of I got picked up for this a couple of weeks ago. So shout out to James Wilkinson. I'm going to say the right thing according to Google and YouTube. Eccentric loading of the plantar fascia.
Is that instead of eccentric? Eccentric is it?
Yeah, it's eccentric apparently.
Okay.
Eccentric. It's the eccentric people and eccentric loading. It's the same pronunciation. So
okay.
That's my new learning. I'm going to share that with you there. So the eccentric loading of the plantar fascia, and of course with the calcaneus descending, you get the eccentric loading of the lower leg tissue into the Achilles tendon, the biggest tendon in the body, which instead of returning 50% of the potential energy with a stretch recoil, the research tells us it can return up to 90. So it's such a significant tendon that if we are not stretching it under load, why is it so big?
Yeah.
When we're walking, we've established if your feet are strong enough, because maybe they've been used without shoes for enough years, if your feet are strong enough, you don't need that Achilles tendon to walk, and you're not stretching it under load. You're not eccentrically loading the Achilles into the lower leg musculature. You're just it's being pulled as the toes lift in ankle dorsiflexion, but it's not being eccentrically loaded. But when you land with both feet up in the air on somewhere in front of the heel, then yes, it is. So we get this amazing stretch recoil. And for me, so some people suggest that the heel bone, the calcaneus, is so big because we need to land on it.
Right.
And I say, well, I understand this discussion. But we're not hammering it. Where when we're walking, we always have one foot on the ground. So we're not landing on it with the forces that we would have when we're running. And when we're running, it in my experience, nobody really wants to land on it with any force, because that would hurt, and instinctively they shy away from it. And maybe the size of it is because the Achilles tendon is so big, it needs a great big chunk of bone to attach onto for the massive eccentric loading of the lower leg musculature into the foot.
Yes, absolutely.
This win-win, no matter what gear you're in, you have a lovely, great big bone to roll through and land with less effort, because you're in the gear of less effort. It's more efficient it uses less energy to walk. But then at some point, when you want to go a bit faster, it's not as efficient as running. So then we go into the next gear, but then we have this same useful calcaneus, which yes, we're not rolling through it quite the same, but it's significant enough and big enough for enormous structures to attach to it.
Yes.
Without it getting distressed.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I know that
I think
Professor Lieberman talks about how the plantar fascia and the Achilles tendon between them account for 17% and 35% respectively of the energy we can recoup during the gait cycle. So in other words, if we're running with that kind of forefoot strike, which and of course Lieberman is evolutionary anthropologist, evolutionary biologist is the right term, from Harvard University, and his whole field is looking at the evolution of running. And so he's looking at essentially the body's ability to be efficient within its environment. That's what evolution is all about, is finding these energetic niches. And so the point really that's alluding to is that if you heel strike, then you're not really utilizing those two structures, the Achilles tendon and the plantar fascia, nearly as well as you could do if you were to forefoot strike, and therefore you're cancelling out a lot of that energetic benefit that you could get if you were to forefoot strike. And again, from an evolutionary perspective, we know there were no Nike Air trainers back in the day, so it does seem that the barefoot condition quite obviously was the natural condition, and that we tend to go towards that forefoot midfoot strike if we're not wearing something cushioned. But there's another element to this, isn't there? And that's the actual substrate that you're running over. Is that something that you've thought about much in terms of running on softer ground versus harder ground, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I come across that discussion a lot too. And am I allowed to drop my book into this now?
Of course, you could. Yeah, of course.
But having written the book even with your shoes on, so that it is all inclusive, and having read so much about this versus that, and a lot of this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, approached it from the point of, well, maybe we can look at this in terms of efficiency rather than right or wrong. Mm-hmm. Is it more efficient or less efficient? And so it seems to me that everything that you just said, and I fell in love with the Achilles tendon when, from Daniel Lieberman's work, which was quoted in Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, which is of course where we meet the amazing and wonderful Barefoot Ted, yes. With whom we have run and enjoyed his company. So there we learn how amazing this Achilles tendon is in that amazing book, and Daniel Lieberman's amazing work, and the substrate that we run on. So I coach on road because it enables people to feel stuff and focus on stuff rather than focusing on keeping upright. My running for pleasure is always off-road. The muddier the better. And my sense is the discussion about hard ground and soft ground doesn't really make much sense to me, because most of the Earth's surface isn't lovely, soft, manicured lawns and fields. You run off-road, and apart from the mud, it's hard. Yes. It's rocky, it's stony, it's hard. This soft sand, well, I mean, okay, you've got to be by the coast to have this soft sand. And the vast majority of the world doesn't live by the coast. And I get this feeling that people think that, well, they need protection when they're on hard ground, and they can only run with less protection on soft ground.
Yes.
And I just think, I don't think we evolved on soft ground.
No.
I don't know, but I just get the feeling that we didn't. And a lot of ground that we traversed was actually hard. I lived in Africa. It's hard.
I was going to say, in Africa, it's, I mean, so we know that our ancestors evolved from Africa, and of course, Africa is a lot hotter and harder than it is in sort of mid-northern Europe. But also, one of the things that I dug out is that Africa's actually got wetter over the last 2 million years. So when our ancestors did first start running, which again from Lieberman's and others' work suggests, it suggests that that started around 2.2 million years ago. That's where the adaptations came in. But the ground was much harder back then, and so it's, you know, we know that Africa today is hard, but back then it would have been even harder. So certainly it seems like our adaptations are for running on very hard ground.
Yeah, I for me, the spread of these amazing 5 rays, these metatarsals with these staggeringly strong muscles in between each one, so they don't ping off in all sorts of different directions. The structure of the foot, it is just endlessly fascinating is the wrong word. I am inspired by feet every time I come across another pair, and I just think that's incredible. Those 33 joints just doing their best, not necessarily in harmony because of the conditions of the body above, but they're still trying to do their best, diving deep into the work of what the foot does, from what I learned through you into what I learned with Gary Ward and Chris Sridharan with motion, and I'm just forever grateful to my feet that continue, even with all of their difficulties because of various surgeries and injuries over the years, and generally falling off my bike, which has an impact on your feet.
Yes.
I think we just need to give them more credit and more freedom, and bunching them up into restrictive shoes and not thinking twice about them. I think that's the issue. You stick them in a pair of shoes. Is that comfortable? Okay, great. That's a comfortable shoe. But is the foot, the 33 jointed foot, able to function within that comfort? Or have you just locked it down?
Yes.
Have you swaddled it in cotton wool and locked its function down? Or is it a shoe where, yes, okay, you've got some nice comfort because that's what you want, but the foot can still function? That's where I am with that.
Yeah. No, fantastic. That's really good. So, I mean, there's so many ways we could go talking about the biomechanics of the foot, but I'd also like to talk a bit about your athletic endeavors, and you know, because you've done ultras and all sorts. So talk us through some of the things that you've done. Basically, in most instances, I believe, in Vibram 5 fingers or other minimalist style footwear.
Yes. So the most recent journey has been a bit of a nightmare because I've had to find shoes. So I've been so long in as little as possible, and still all the way through the summer, I'm either in my 5 fingers or in some other very minimal, broad shoed slipper, something that I just don't want to feel the shoe on my foot. The task of Cape Wrath, and that's a real place. Right. So I am challenging myself to run Cape Wrath in May next year, which is 400 kilometers from Fort William, so I'm putting it out there, there's no going back, Fort William to Cape Wrath. I thought it was a joke name, but it's a real place, the most northern point of the UK, which is the northwestern peninsula of the Scottish Highlands. And the thing about Minimalist is the lack of grip. So there can be grip, and grip on some degree of light mud, some degree of a little bit of stony stuff. There can be enough. And so for years I would run off-road in the Vibram 5-finger Spiridons. I'm not even, they're not called those anymore, are they? They're V-Trail.
Yeah.
But I knew that Cape Wrath, I was not setting myself up for success running heat bogs if and really very challenging terrain if I didn't have some really kind of serious grip. And I wasn't spending expending energy going sideways with my feet and instead of just forward. So but my feet don't like shoes to the extent that my going out, my posh shoes for going out are little leather slippers, like little leather gloves, and those are my posh shoes. So if it's wet, I go barefoot to across the wet ground to the venue, and then I wipe my bare feet on the mat, and then I put my posh leather slippers on. And that's as far as I'll go with posh shoes. So anyway, I'm running this amazing 400-kilometer thing. I don't know if I can do it, and I'm trying to find shoes, and I think I found the right pair. But it's hard because my feet are not enjoying.
Yeah.
They are. I'm finding my way.
It's interesting, isn't it? I went for a run last week in a pair of Minimalist shoes that were sent to me by a company outside of Vibram, and they have a lovely ground feel to them. They're obviously zero drop. They're fairly minimalist. They've got grips on the soles. But I think having run in Vibram 5-fingers for so many years, I was just on the local trails, and I could feel every time my foot was on a kind of camber or an incline, or it hit a stone or a root, the amount of force that puts through the ankle compared to when you're in a pair of Vibram 5-fingers. And I think it's to do with what we were alluding to earlier about these rays, and the way that the rays of the foot are designed to accommodate the different contours of the ground. That's really, it's such a kind of clever design feature that if your big toe hits a stone or a root, then it extends, and the other 4 toes plant naturally and maintain ankle stability, or it could be the other way around, or it could be in the middle, but your foot wraps around the challenges on the ground, right? But in a shoe that's flat, even if it's minimalist, it tends to create quite a lot of torque through that ankle joint.
And it's with my amazing new tech, just on that subject, I am measuring, I have the data for myself, so I'll measure somebody running barefoot if their feet are used to running in a minimal shoe. So for instance, a footballer will be used to running around the pitch in a completely flat shoe, no support, just studs underneath.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to then measure that same footballer with a pair of trainers on and see the force change. So we know the studies have gone back decades now, where it was established that when there is a cushion underneath your foot, you will land firmer, you will land harder. It's the same body weight. So on my force plate treadmill, people will run and they will have a force going into the force plate that I can measure with 8,000 sensors.
Wow.
And they will run at the same speed with their shoes on, and there will be more force. And I find that so interesting. It's being revealed in front of me. I am reading and seeing for myself the research that goes back actually a really long way.
Well, Nike found out about that in the 80s, didn't they? So that's one of the famous quotes from the Born to Run book.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So I am having to find a way to, I can feel through these shoes, I can feel the stones that I'm on, so I'm not so separated that I can't feel the ground, but I am aware that my foot doesn't feel even remotely like it normally does when I'm running in my nothing, and my feet, as you say, are wrapping around. But needs must. So I set myself the challenge. I wrote the book called Even With Your Shoes On. So hey, I'm going to have to practice what I preach and say, yeah, you can do it with whatever is comfortable on your feet.
Yeah.
But the story, which in my head I'd started, I was going to finish now. My right foot has been my nemesis for so long, and it's never felt the same as my left, and we've only just discovered why. So a thorn, an African thorn, went into my right heel before my youngest son was born, and he's just coming up 27.
Wow.
And we couldn't get it out. We couldn't get the thorn out. And then you don't go to A&E in Africa. You certainly didn't then. So we tried, and then eventually I forgot all about it. And 2 years ago, it came out.
Oh wow! Wow!
There was I'd come back from a run, and I was in the garden, and I was just admiring my battered feet and saying thank you to them. And there was a peculiar small disc-shaped piece of thin skin at the back of my heel with a black thing seemed to be floating around in it. And the skin was very thin. I just grabbed a pair of tweezers and pierced it. Didn't hurt at all. And then this 1.5 centimeter African thorn.
Wow.
Out.
That's amazing.
With a puddle of milky fluid.
Yes.
And it had worked its way out. And I didn't know that the tissue until last Saturday, when Chris Sridharan helped me with my foot, and the tissue had wrapped itself around this thorn and embedded it somewhere around my heel, and I never went there. So this is a fascinating conversation that I have with people's feet who come to see me when they have a verruca. And this is apropos nothing, but it's so relevant when you talk about feet and the way that people are moving through their feet. If you have got something in or on your foot which is creating the need for your central nervous system to avoid it, you will. You won't even know that you're avoiding it. Your central nervous system has got your back. It's organized it for you. So for 27 years, I have been over 27 years. It was before he was born. So maybe 28 years. I've been moving in a way around my right foot. No matter what I did to my right foot, it never felt like the left. And now we are rewilding the tissue because my heel looked like, and I can't see my heel. My heel looked like a worn down shoe where somebody has worn down the outside of their heel. The typical leather soled shoes would give you a really good idea. That's what my heel looked like, and the tissue was forward and medial instead of lateral and posterior.
Wow.
And we're just tugging it back, and my foot is feeling like my left for the first time in living memory.
Wow.
So folk, check your feet. If there's a verruca, you can't leave it there. You've got to get rid of it because you will be walking around it. And the point being, that's what happens with shoes. If a shoe doesn't let you use the whole foot, you can't use your whole foot. You can only use your whole foot if you can. I know that sounds a bit daft to say, but that's literally what it boils down to.
Yeah, amazing.
Fascinating.
Really fascinating. Yeah, fantastic. So, but in spite of that thorn, you have covered a few miles since 27 years ago. So,
well, you see, maybe that's why I run. I love running because I'm not landing on my heel.
Right.
I'm landing somewhere in front, and my heel comes down to kiss the ground briefly, but not for very long, and it hasn't held me back at all. It's just feeling a lot better now that it's out. Me and my African thorns. So I've just done my 8th Ironman. I thought it was going to be my last Ironman. I intended for it to be my last. But I got lost in the dark, as I do, and I got DQ'd. And so now I face plant and think, oh no, I can't I can't finish on a DQ. I can't. So now I've got to do another one. And I just love going out for the day. So I run ultras, and I'm not fast. I start at the back because I walk to warm up. And the challenge is always, well, how far can I run? So the question with when I started running in minimal, it was, well, how far can you run? Because you can't run very far in them. I'm thinking, really? Well, I don't know. I'll have to try. So the experiment has been to answer questions.
Yeah. So
if the question is, how far can you run? Well, I can't answer the question until I try.
Yeah.
So initially it was a marathon in an Ironman. And I'd never run a marathon all by itself. I was thwarted age 17 and 50 weeks. And never went back to the said marathon. So the Ironman marathon, after a 2.4 mile swim and a 112 mile bike ride, then you just knock out a marathon. That was my first marathon. And then it was, okay, I can do a marathon. So then we do an ultra. And I remember a conversation with you way back with the flow work. Would it keep my feet warm? Yes. And it did. It did.
Like a neoprene.
The neoprene, it worked.
Five-finger shoe,
yeah, it did work. So then the furthest I'd run over 3 days was 83 miles. Druids Challenge. That was 2011. I did that. And then it was, somebody said, well, can you do 100 kilometers in one go? I think, I don't know, give it a go. So gave it a go, and it turns out you can. No blisters, no nothing. I got bored in the dark. I couldn't see anything. I got 85k, but everybody was fine. And then I was expecting somebody to say 100 miles in one go, and I just thought, this is just numbers. This is it doesn't interest me really. And then the Cape Wrath came up, and it was, okay, so 400 kilometers in 8 days. So if that was 50 kilometers a day, that wouldn't be a challenge, because 50 kilometers a day, it would be hard, but it would be, well, yeah, you could probably do it though. But it's not, because it's the wilderness, and some days are longer than others. It's a real mixed bag. So then it becomes a real challenge. Can I have no idea.
Right.
So that's the next challenge.
Yeah, amazing.
Seeing if I can with lots of very long days. We'll see.
Yes. Now I remember for one of those, you told me a story about you fueling up on walnuts. Was it walnuts that got you through one of those ultras? I seem to remember you saying that you got there with something like a handful of walnuts. And I was thinking, that's not your conventional brother's snack.
Either walnuts or Brazil nuts. Yes.
Brazil nuts, okay, yeah.
Yes, it could have been either. Might have been macadamias even, but yes, one of those three. I was just thinking, the other marathon I did do, just while I think of the events I did do, the other marathon I did do, because it was, you can't run, the other question was, well, you can't run it fast. You're so slow, Helen. It's all very well, but when you run faster, then it's not sustainable. So then I did the Amsterdam Marathon, which coupled two things. It was sustaining nose breathing for the entire marathon. There were two questions. Number one, you can't run fast nose breathing. And number two, Helen, you can't run fast. And it was, okay. I'm not interested in sprinting because I'm interested in endurance. So if I wanted to maintain a pace, could I? So the question was, can you nose breathe a marathon, and can it be a halfway decent time? And it would have been. I failed to achieve, because I got bored. I got so bored. At 35 kilometers, I was on for a 3:43 marathon. With nose breathing, and for me, was respectable.
Definitely, yeah.
And in Vibram Five Fingers, no issue with being minimal. You know, you don't have to be a slow marathon runner to run a slow timer to run in minimal shoes. But I got bored on the industrial flyovers outside of Amsterdam, and I'm thinking, where's all the pretty stuff and where's the canal? And I will to bother. And I came in at 4:11. But, you know, hey ho.
Yeah.
But to go back to the question of, what was the question, Matt?
I was asking about the nuts, the walnuts or whatever it was.
Yes. So yes, nutrition.
Yes.
So I fuel on fat, not sugar.
Yes. Very good.
Zero. No sugar at all. Yeah.
Right. And I know that probably, I imagine it must have been 2012 or 2013, we were having a discussion and we started talking paleo. And in fact, perhaps even before that, we were talking metabolic typing. And I remember one of the things that you were having challenges with was that you were feeling very nauseous during your training or after your training. I can't remember which it was. And I said, well, that's a strong parasympathetic response. And perhaps if you assess yourself on the metabolic typing approach, you might find something out about how your physiology is responding to the stresses you're putting it under. And sure enough, you tested as a parasympathetic type, which push, you know, and the recommendation for someone who is more parasympathetic is to eat, you know, more towards that paleo style of higher protein, higher fat. So you did that, didn't you?
I did. On the 16th of September, do you remember that train journey?
Yes.
2016, I think it was. Was it 3 years ago? It might have been a bit longer.
Oh, it's longer than that for sure. Yeah. It must have been 2013 or 14, I think. Yeah,
so it was definitely the 16th of September because we were on our back from Edinburgh, and you had a chat with me because I potted around with superfoods because I was. The problem was twofold. I was endlessly nauseous on endurance events, and you know, just puked my way around all the Ironmans. And I was also I was hyperglycemic, so I would have a hypo pretty much every day, and I would be in a complete state if I left the house without any sugar in my bag or pockets, because I would feel vulnerable that I would have a hypo and I wouldn't have the first aid to get me out of my hypo. And on that day, having been pre-diabetic for as long as I can remember, I've had hypos every day since I was 11. I'm being tested every year. Are you diabetic yet? Am I diabetic yet? No, you're not diabetic yet. Okay, great. Carry on with the slow release, complex carbs, little and often, super foods. I mean, you name it, I tried it. And then when I just stopped sugar, just stopped. Then the hypo stopped, the nausea stopped, it all stopped. Just like that. And when I went back to the doctor the next year for my next "Are you diabetic yet?" test, I said, oh, and I haven't had a hypo for however long it was, and problem solved. And bless him, he didn't even ask me how. Right. Wow.
Didn't want to know.
Yeah. So it started with paleo, which was that cut out all the grains, of course. And then we were creeping. We were making nut crumbles one Christmas as a treat, and then the nut crumbles increased in frequency, and we found ourselves gaining weight, and my hypos were coming back. So then that moved from paleo to keto, doing the whole shebang with using the piss sticks and the breathalyzers and the whole thing, to discover that I needed to be around 15 grams of carbs to stay in ketosis and to stay under the radar of having hypos. And then since then, and then just thrived. You know, just went about my life, minding my own business, just not eating carbs of any form. No fruit. People would be horrified.
Yes.
No fruit. Yeah, no fruit. Maybe occasional handful of blueberries. And when we say handful, I count them. Maybe 5 or 6.
Right.
So no fruit. Plenty of green veg.
Mm-hmm.
And just no starches.
Mm.
And I thrived. I really thrived. Solved all of the nausea problems and the hypo problems and nice steady energy.
Mm.
And it's accidentally become more, some would say extreme, but I'm thriving more. I'm now discovered the formula for even more thrive, more energy, and even less, even my digestive system is even better.
So, what is the formula?
Being a Czech practitioner, with poor Czech being the poopy policeman, we talk poop all the time.
Yes.
And all of my clients, if they let me, if they're willing, we will talk poop.
Yeah.
And the need for toilet paper, and this needs to be discussed. Is this the platform?
We can discuss it here. That's fine, because I can put the image up on the show notes so people can see exactly what we're talking about.
Fantastic. So for me, the definition of a wonderful digestive system, which is strong and healthy, and you're eating the foods that enable you to thrive, isn't just what ends up in a toilet bowl, but what ends up on the toilet paper. So some people call it ghost wipes.
Right, yes.
I just say, do you need toilet paper? And people look at me like I'm mad.
Right.
And if I need toilet paper, I'm just like, oh no, what's gone wrong? Oh my goodness, I was a bit naughty. Oops. And it makes me feel, I know in myself when I've eaten something that I'm not thriving with, I know that when I go to the loo, it's just,
It's interesting, interesting point, because it's one of those things that if you think about, we've got pet cats, we've got a dog, got rabbits, none of them wipe their bums, right?
No.
And I've always thought, this is an interesting thing. Why do humans wipe their bums? What's that about? But I didn't know we were going to be having this conversation, but it is an interesting thing, isn't it? It doesn't make any sense if you put a human in their natural context, then that, of course, go back to Dan Lieberman. I don't suppose he's found any Kleenex or Andrex or anything in his archaeological digs when he's been looking for human remains and all the rest of it. So it just doesn't make sense that we would need that, yet it's so commonplace or universal, ubiquitous, that we all use it, and
that we should need it.
That's right.
And, and that we not only toilet paper, but you could spend a small fortune on special little moist tissues to clean up said area once you have used the toilet paper, and of course bidets.
Yes.
And all of this cleanliness that's required, where although we haven't got a double sphincter like many other mammals, why is it so messy when it doesn't have to be messy? And I am, most days it's just a joy. I go to the loo and it's just so clean.
No wipe required.
No wipe required, exactly. Poopy policeman, I get gold stars, and it feels so good. You feel like the food has gone in, you have absorbed the nourishment, and you get rid of cleanly what your body can't use.
Yes.
And it's not a horrible mess. And the accident came about. I was so busy, I didn't have time to cook. So my husband Brian had to do some cooking for a while, and so we just had some meat, man with barbecue.
Good,
so
yes.
I barbecue, slam some meat on the barbecue, and that's what we had for dinner. We just had the meat, and after a week of that, because I was so busy. We both almost simultaneously commented, are you feeling really quite good at the moment? Yeah, we were both feeling really quite good.
Yes.
Go figure. No veg. No no fiber, irritating bowel.
Yes. Yeah.
Have
you listened to much of the discussion on the carnivore diet? I mean, I know this is what you're alluding to, but for me, obviously, I heard about it. I've been following Jordan Peterson a little bit, and he's perhaps one of the more famous people that is using the carnivore diet with his daughter, and they have found that it's reversed their autoimmune issues, their mental health issues. Where I say reversed, I think largely reversed is probably a fairer way to describe it. But then, of course, there are many people out there that have specialised in this. There's even a guy called Paul Saladino, and the funny thing is that his surname's got salad in it. But yet he is the kind of one of the leading carnivore diet specialists. And when you listen to his description of it, it's a very compelling argument. He's very technical, lots of polysyllabic medical words. He is a doctor, but he talks about all of the rationale for why we don't, a lot of the things that we think we need, such as vitamin C. He says, no, you don't need that if you're eating meat, because I'm trying to remember the rationale. I probably shouldn't have dived down this rabbit hole without doing some preparation. But
I can help a little bit there. The vitamin C is in the meat. And because of another compound that goes alongside it in meat, is it thiacin? I'm pretty sure it begins with T.
Okay.
Because of that element, the body to thrive needs less vitamin C. It needs more vitamin C without that compound that is in meat. And with that compound in meat, you need less vitamin C, and there's enough vitamin C in the meat.
Right. Yeah. One of the points they make, though, and I don't know if you've followed this, is the idea that a carnivore diet shouldn't be a flesh foods diet alone. It should also include organ meats and skin, and so like crackling or collagen or whatever. So they're saying, essentially, if you're eating the idea of the nose to tail consumption of the animal, then that's a very healthy diet. But if it's just flesh foods alone, then that could be problematic. What's your experience been there? Have you?
Well, N equals 2, and we've only accidentally came across this since June. And for me, it's all about each person. It's so difficult to have this conversation without the discussion about sustainability. And feeding the planet, but just from an experiential point of view, where I have been slowly pulling myself away from any kind of carbohydrate since that day on the train, and now increasingly even away from more and more away from plant food stuffs in general. I'm not very good with organ meats, but we'll have pork with crackling. We'll have chicken with, of course, the skin. We'll favour the fatty steaks with the lamb, all of the fat. I mean, the fat is the amazing part of it, and of course eggs with all of the nutrients within that. Yeah. So for us, there's been only feeling better.
Yes.
So far.
And do you do any slow cooking or any kind of stews or anything like that to get the more fibrous components of meat broken down, or is that not really something you do? Bone broths, anything like that?
No.
Okay.
Because I haven't got time, and
yes.
I don't know if he would, but we chew the gristly bits.
Right. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Very good.
So sometimes I think, do you know what? I don't want to eat that. But we will eat pretty much all of the stuff.
Yes.
Rather than leave it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just did my most recent podcast I did with Leah Keith, who's the author of The Vegetarian Myth, and she was talking about, one of the key parts of her book is talking about sustainability and the ecological impacts of both vegetarianism and meat eating. And the challenge for meat eating is if you're eating factory farmed, standard agriculture type cuts of meat, whereas if you're eating organic and especially grass-fed organic, then actually what she has uncovered, and I have as well in my own research around it, is that it's actually a net carbon sink. So you're not contributing to global warming at all, because it's when cows, for example, are fed on grains that they start burping up methane. When they eat grass, that doesn't happen because they're eating their natural diet.
Well, that makes sense, because I can fart with impunity and there'll be no smell.
Yeah.
And frankly, it doesn't often happen anyway.
Right.
With when your digestive system, it seems to be running really smoothly.
Yeah.
That the buildup of air doesn't seem to happen. Mm-hmm. And if there is any that needs to pop out, there is no horrible smell.
Yeah. Interesting stuff.
The cow is eating well, and then and that is happening. I hadn't heard that. That's wonderful news. Then that makes me feel better, and
good.
And it completely makes sense to me.
Yeah, well, it's all cycles, isn't it? If everything's doing what it's supposed to do in its natural cycle, then the whole system functions pretty well. But we're running a little short on time, and I know there's a couple of things that we wanted to get into. One thing that I'd like to mention, just because it's been such a fantastic help to me and clients of mine and various people I've spoken to, is your Barefoot Goddess series. So do you want to just briefly explain about that?
So me and Kirsty Hawkshaw, the wonderful Kirsty Hawkshaw, she popped to the shop one day. I had no idea who she was, and she wanted some help with running, and I was telling her my struggles with finding music to help the people I was working with run to. They wanted to run to music, but they were running to really ploddy, slow cadence stuff that I can dance to, but I can't run to. I can't even walk to it, but I can dance to it. And she mulled over this and came back with a certain beat, and I said, yes, that's perfect. And then I discovered that she was a pop star. So then we just started naturally working together, and we still are, because she's helping me create the Audible for the book. So that'll be out, hopefully. We've just got one more chapter to do, and then the editing. So it's the Audible of Even With Your Shoes On is nearly there.
Excellent. So
together, she created this amazing music with the cadence that would keep feet from becoming slow and inefficient. So the foot needs to be on the ground as long as it needs to for the stretch recoil to be loaded for it to recoil. So we need if it's too fast, sometimes on technical trails, the feet need to be so fast it's like lightning fast, and you are not. This is survival. To stay upright, you've got to have fast feet, but you're not getting efficiency.
Yeah.
But that's fair enough, because what's the totem pole priority there is to not face plant.
Sure.
And then when you're looking for as much efficiency as you can, you need the foot to be on the ground long enough to load the plantar fascia, the lower leg calf musculature, the Achilles, everything. But not so long that you lose the momentum into the ground and the stretch recoil into the ground, so that then you actually have to work harder to keep the same speed going forward. So it was finding a range of cadences. So all of the Barefoot Goddess, we wore our heart on our sleeves, didn't we? The Barefoot Goddess. Although we made an album for the blokes called Apollo to make
yes.
to make feel. And actually, I really enjoyed the music of Apollo.
No, they're both great. They're both great. Yeah.
Coaching, same coaching words, just different music. And we made it to help people think about and notice what they were doing. And there are words now that are in the audios that I wouldn't necessarily use now. But I still feel that compared to what else is out there, it's still wonderful stuff. And the music, the instrumentals, Kirsty's work is just out of this world.
Fantastic. Yeah.
We want to do some more. We want to put a few of the chapters of the book onto an audio to help people play and notice things as they run. Just invite them to notice things and explore. And change the cadence up with her music so that they can explore. So that's also the projects in the pending train. Kirsty and her amazing music. Yes, definitely.
Excellent. Good. Well, look, I've just been thinking about we've actually got quite a few things that we could dig into further and things that we haven't even covered yet. And so I'm just thinking maybe we should wrap it up there for today and do a second one to dive in a bit deeper. What do you think?
Oh, amazing. I'd love it. I've loved chatting with you.
Yeah, no, it's been great. And there's been so many areas where I thought, I'd like to talk about this, but I've had to sort of rein it in because I knew that we were on a fairly tight time budget. So if we wrap it up there for today, but do another one, as soon as we can, just so we keep the momentum with it, that would be great.
Love that, Matt.
Is that, that works for you? Brilliant. Okay, well, let me thank you very much for today and for all of your insights over the years and the things we've shared. It's been fantastic and lots more to talk about. So I'll look forward to that. But I'll let you go because I know you've got a client. And and we'll continue in a couple of weeks' time.
All right. Nice nattering.
All right. Thanks, Helen.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So that was part 1 with Helen, and part 2 will be following next week. If you want to learn more about Helen, about her highly skilled, experienced and technological assessments of your biomechanical function and walking or running technique, you can do that at helen-hall.co.uk. That's Helen, Helen, Hall, HALL.co.uk. And you can also get a copy of her book called Even With Your Shoes On her website too. Or you can access the amazing Run and Walk coaching albums on Bandcamp at barefootaudio.bandcamp.com. And I found those fantastic for my own running, so I can recommend those through personal experience. So thanks once again for listening. I look forward to seeing you on the next show.